The last school bell had rung hours ago, yet Liam Carter's seat at the dinner table remained empty, just as it had for the past 14 years. The story began on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, in a small neighborhood where everyone claimed they knew each other's business. The playground swings still creaked in the cold wind, their chains groaning like old bones. The paint on the school fence had long since peeled away, and the streets felt as if they were holding their breath. On that day, there had been no shouts, no car screech, no struggle in the open. One moment, Liam had been in the hallway of Lincoln Middle School, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and the next he was gone. The cameras in the area showed nothing unusual. His friends saw him wave goodbye at the school gates, but no one could say which way he turned. It was as if he had stepped into a space between seconds, vanishing without leaving a single trace. The years that followed for the Carter family were not marked by the seasons, but by the soundless weight of absence. Birthdays came and went, with an extra candle that was never blown out. His room was left exactly as it had been that morning. Posters curling on the walls, a half-finished drawing on the desk, a jacket hanging on the back of his chair. His mother, Helen, never moved the jacket. She said it still smelled faintly of laundry powder and rain. Every knock on the front door was met with a moment of suspended hope, the kind that ached before it could breathe. 14 years after that Tuesday, the sky over Seattle was drowned in rain. Streets glistened under broken streetlights, and the gutters gurgled with dirty water. In the late hours of the night, a lone figure appeared on Helen Carter's porch. He was soaked through, his hood heavy with rain, his face older but unmistakably familiar. In his right hand, he held something small and metallic. The faint porch light caught its edge, a keychain with the initials LC, the same one his father had given him the morning he vanished. Helen's heart stopped in her chest. She opened the door wider, expecting an embrace, a flood of answers, but instead, Liam leaned closer. His voice low and raw from years of silence. "It is not safe here." Why would Liam return after all these years, only to warn his mother? And what had kept him hidden away in a world just beyond reach for so long? If you want to uncover the truth to these questions, like this video and subscribe to my channel, Unscripted Tales. Let us reach 5,000 likes on this story to continue the journey. The rain hammered against the roof as Helen stood frozen in the doorway. Liam's eyes darted to the street behind her, scanning the shadows. She could see the faint tremor in his hands, the way his grip tightened on the keychain until his knuckles whitened. For a moment, the sound of passing tires hissed through the rain as a car slowed in front of the house. Its headlights swept across the porch, catching Liam's face in full for the first time. There was something in his expression, a mixture of fear and urgency that Helen had never seen before, even when he was a child. The vehicle rolled past, but Liam did not relax. He took a step back from the doorway, his voice even quieter now. "Tomorrow, same time, but not here." Then, without another word, he turned and walked into the downpour, his shadow dissolving into the mist. Helen stood there long after he was gone, the keychain's glint burned into her mind, the echo of his voice still hanging in the air. For the first time in 14 years, she felt both hope and a deep, unshakable dread. Rain had been falling over Seattle for 3 long days, the kind of steady cold that seeped into walls and bones alike. It blurred the edges of houses and street corners, making everything seem older, heavier, and somehow lonelier. Helen Carter stood in her small kitchen, her fingers curled around a chipped white mug. She had poured the coffee hours ago, but it had gone cold without her noticing. Her gaze was fixed on the window, watching the rivulets of water trail down the glass, distorting the view outside like the world itself was shifting beyond the glass. The old cedar tree in the front yard swayed under the wind. Its rough bark was dark with rain, and its branches bent low, whispering against each other. It was the same tree Liam used to climb when he was a boy, his sneakers scraping the bark. As he pulled himself higher to hide from her calls at dinner time, the sound of those branches creaking in the wind had always made her uneasy, as if the tree remembered more than it should. The neighborhood felt different now. Once there had been the sound of children playing in the street, the clatter of bicycle chains, and the calls of neighbors greeting one another. Now, only the occasional hiss of passing cars broke the silence. The paint on the houses had faded, driveways were cracked, and the old street lamps hummed weakly, their lights struggling. Through the mist, Helen's mind wandered back, as it often did, to that afternoon 14 years ago. She remembered it in fragments. The smell of wet pavement, the sharp chill in the air, the sound of the school bus brakes down the block. She had been slicing apples at the counter when the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to the school secretary, polite yet uneasy, asking if Liam had gone home early. When Helen said no, there had been a pause, the kind of pause that changes everything. By nightfall, panic had rooted itself deep inside her, and it had never left. Now she thought of Liam's face from the night before. Older yet, still her boy, his voice low and urgent. She could still see the way his eyes had searched the darkness behind him, as though something unseen was moving there. She wondered where he had gone after he stepped into the rain. She wondered who might have been watching. Outside, the wind picked up, and the cedar's branches scraped against the window. Frame with a hollow sound, Helen stepped closer to the glass, peering into the street, but saw only shadows and the shifting curtain of rain. Somewhere deep inside, a thought whispered to her, what if Liam had not come back alone? The house had fallen into that deep kind of silence that comes late at night, when even the wind seems to pause between gusts. Helen sat at the kitchen table, the dim light above casting a small pool of warmth in the otherwise dark room. She had been listening to the rain, letting it fill the empty spaces of her thoughts, when it came, a sharp, deliberate knock at the front door. 3 short raps, spaced evenly, like the person on the other side had no doubt she would hear. Chest tightened. Visitors did not come at this hour, not in this neighborhood anymore. She stayed still for a moment, straining to hear if it would happen again. When it did, she stood, setting her cold coffee aside, and moved slowly toward the front of the house. Each step across the wooden floor seemed louder than the last. Through the frosted glass panel of the door, she could make out a dark silhouette, tall, still unmoving, not a neighbor, not anyone she recognized. For a heartbeat, she thought about pretending she was not home. But something in the rhythm of that knock had pulled her forward. She unlocked the deadbolt, and slid the chain free, opening the door just enough for the porch light to spill out into the rain. The figure stepped closer, and her breath caught. He was older now, his face sharper, but the curve of his jaw and the dark eyes that met hers belonged to Liam. He stood dripping under the storm, water sliding from the hood of his jacket. In his hand, glinting faintly, was the keychain with the initials LCE, exactly as it had been the day he vanished. Her voice failed her. She could only stare, trying to reconcile the boy she had lost with the man in front of her. Liam leaned in, slightly, his gaze sweeping the street behind her before settling on her face. His words were quiet, but there was an edge to them that chilled her more than the wind ever could. It is not safe here. Before she could speak, headlights cut through the rain. A car slowed as it passed the house, the beams sweeping over the porch. Liam's shoulders stiffened, his hand closing tightly around the keychain. The vehicle rolled on, disappearing into the mist, but the unease did not leave his eyes. Tomorrow, same time, but not here. He stepped back, his boots splashing in the shallow puddles, and then he was gone into the night. Helen stood in the doorway long after he vanished, the rain filling the silence he had left behind. She knew then that whatever had taken him all those years ago had not let him go completely. Somewhere out there in the rain, the reason for his warning was still moving closer. Before the years of silence, before the rain-soaked night on the porch, Liam Carter had been the kind of boy who moved quietly through the world. He was not shy exactly, but he had a habit of listening more than speaking, of watching people and catching details others missed. Teachers remembered him for his steady focus, and classmates often noticed the sketchbook he carried everywhere. Inside it were drawings of strange landscapes, places that seemed both real and imagined, corners of a world only he could see. His father, Robert Carter, was a man of few words, but his pride in Liam was clear in smaller gestures, a nod when Liam fixed something himself, a pat on the shoulder after a good soccer game. On one autumn morning, Robert had pressed something into his son's hand before school, a small metal keychain with the initials LC engraved on one side. "You will always know where home is," he had said. Liam had tucked it into his pocket without knowing it would be the last gift his father would ever give him. The day Liam vanished was cold and bright, the air carrying the scent of wet leaves. He remembered walking out of school, hearing the chatter of friends behind him, and starting down the cracked sidewalk. Then the memory blurred, like a page smudged by water. There was a faint hum of a car engine, the smell of gasoline, and then nothing. When his mind cleared, he was lying in a small room he did not know, the walls painted pale yellow. A single narrow window showing a yard he had never seen before. A woman named Marina was there, her voice calm but firm. She told him she was a friend of the family, that his parents could not be there right now. Every time he asked about going home, she gave the same answer. "It is not possible right now. You are safe here." Safe became a word he began to doubt. He grew older under a different name, went to a school where no one knew who Liam Carter was. He learned not to ask questions when strangers visited Marina's house. Years passed, and the sharp edges of his life in Seattle began to fade. The sound of his mother calling from the kitchen became harder to remember. The feel of the cedar tree's rough bark under his palms slipped further away, but the keychain hidden in a drawer in his room stayed with him. It was the one thing that had not changed, the one thing that reminded him he had not imagined the life he had lost. Even in the far-off place where he lived, he knew someone was always keeping watch, making sure he never found the way back. Until the night an opening appeared, and he took it. But the past had followed him, and it was still following Dot. The following day moved slowly, each hour stretching longer than the last. Helen Carter went through her usual routine, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the night before. She replayed the sight of Liam standing in the rain, the tightness in his voice, the way his eyes had scanned the street like a hunted animal. She wanted answers, but more than that, she wanted to make sure he was safe. At work, she found herself staring out of the window, instead of reading the papers in front of her. The city blurred in the drizzle, and every moving shadow in the street made her wonder if Liam was somewhere close. By the time she returned home, the unease had grown into something heavier. She decided to busy herself, but her steps carried her up the narrow attic stairs instead. The air in the attic was cool and dry, carrying the faint scent of cardboard and old fabric. The single bulb overhead swung slightly, casting shadows on the walls. She began opening the stacked boxes, most of them filled with things she had not touched in years. At the far corner, she spotted a box marked with a fading strip of tape and the word Liam written in her own handwriting. Sat on the floor and lifted the lid. Inside were pieces of a childhood frozen in place. School notebooks with bent corners, soccer medals dulled by dust, a hoodie that still carried the faint scent of the laundry powder she used back then. There were photographs too, their edges curling, showing Liam at birthdays and summer picnics. At the very bottom, something caught her attention. A sheet of paper, folded neatly but with creases softened by time. She opened it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map, sketched in pencil, showing a few streets she recognized near the waterfront. A small X was marked beside what looked like a long, narrow building by the edge of the water. Dot. Her pulse quickened. She had never seen this map before. Had Liam drawn it before he vanished? Or had someone placed it in the box later, hoping she would find it? She slipped the paper into her coat pocket. If Liam kept his promise to meet her tonight, she would ask him. But part of her feared that the X on that map was not just a location. It might be a door she was not ready to open. The diner sat on the edge of the city, a place where the neon sign flickered in the rain and the smell of coffee seemed to seep into the walls. Liam Carter sat in the corner booth, his hood pulled low, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. He kept his back to the wall, his eyes fixed on the door. Each time it opened, he tensed slightly, watching the faces that came in before lowering his gaze again. Helen stepped inside a few minutes. Later, her coat damp from the steady drizzle outside. Her eyes scanned the rows of booths until they found him. She crossed the room quickly, sliding into the seat across from him. "You came," he said softly, glancing past her toward the windows. "You told me to," she replied, but his stare lingered on. "The street outside, you might have been followed." Helen frowned, glancing over her shoulder. The other customers seemed ordinary enough. A couple talking over soup. A man reading a newspaper at the counter. But then the door opened again, and a tall man stepped in. His jacket was dark, his cap pulled low. He walked toward the counter, without looking directly at them, but for a fraction of a second, his gaze flicked toward their booth. It was so quick that Helen might have missed it. If she had not been watching, Liam's fingers drummed lightly against the table before he spoke. "The people who took me were after something. They thought my father had it. I did not understand what it was back then, but they kept me because they believed I could lead them to it." Helen reached into her coat and slid the folded paper across the table. "I found this yesterday. It was in your old box in the attic." Liam unfolded it, his eyes scanning the lines and the X. His jaw tightened. "I did not draw this, and I have never seen it before." For a moment they sat in silence, the hum of the diner filling the space between them. Liam finally pushed the map back toward her. "Keep it, we might need it." They agreed to leave separately. Helen walked out into the damp night first, pulling her coat tighter around her. As she passed the corner, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street, engine idling. Its windows were tinted, hiding whoever was inside. She kept walking, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on her back. Somewhere in that vehicle, someone was deciding their next move. The morning was heavy with fog, the kind that made the street outside look like it was holding secrets. Helen Carter stepped out of her bedroom and froze. Something pale lay on the floor by the front door. She bent down and picked it up. It was a single sheet of paper. No envelope, no name, just 4 words printed in block letters. "Stop asking questions." Her first instinct was to throw it away, but the weight of the words settled in her chest like a stone. She knew exactly what they were about. Her eyes shifted toward her coat, where the folded map from Liam still sat in the pocket. She did not want to go to that place, but she also knew she would by late afternoon. The sky was the color of wet slate. Helen parked her car 2 blocks from the location marked with the X. The area was industrial and quiet, lined with rusted fences and warehouses whose windows were either broken or boarded shut. The one she was looking for had a rusted metal door, hanging slightly open, swaying just enough to creak with each breath of wind. She slipped inside. The air was colder here, carrying the faint smell of damp concrete and oil. Her footsteps echoed as she moved the beam of her small flashlight across stacks of empty crates and broken pallets. The light caught on something lying near the far wall. She knelt and picked it up. It was a piece of blue fabric, worn and frayed. Her stomach tightened when she recognized the faint stitched emblem of Liam's old soccer team, the same one he had played for the year he disappeared. A sound broke the silence. Slow, deliberate footsteps, coming from deeper within the building. Helen's flashlight trembled in her hand. She took a step back toward the door, her shoes crunching on grit. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice, low and distant, rolled through the shadows. "You should not be here." Helen's heart lurched. She turned and ran, the beam of her flashlight bouncing wildly over the cracked floor. She did not stop until she was outside, gulping the damp air. The door clanging shut behind her. Somewhere inside that warehouse, someone had been waiting, and she was certain they knew exactly who she was. The phone rang just as Helen was locking the front door that evening. She almost did not answer, but when she saw the number, the one Liam had given her, she picked up. His voice was sharper than she had ever heard it. "You went there, did you not?" Helen's hand tightened on the receiver. "I found the fabric from your soccer shirt." "Someone was there, Liam. You should not have gone," he said, his words quick, almost urgent. "They will be watching you now, the same way they have been watching me." Helen felt a chill move through her, but it was his next sentence that rooted her to the spot. I think someone close to us has been helping them." She wanted to ask who, but he told her to meet him instead. A public place. Somewhere open. She drove to the old park by the river, its benches slick with rain, and the lamps along the walkway glowing weakly through the mist. Liam was leaning against the railing of the pedestrian bridge when she arrived, the hood of his jacket casting his face in shadow. She joined him, the sound of water moving below filling the pause between them. "There was a man I saw often when I was taken," Liam said finally. "His name was Victor Hale. He knew things about father, things I did not even know. At first I thought it was about money, but it was not. He wanted something else." Helen frowned. "What kind of something?" "Papers, documents. He said father had something that did not belong to him." The rain tapped steadily against the metal rail as they stood there, the river moving slow and dark beneath them. Helen thought of Robert's old workshop, the one she had not touched since he died. If Victor was connected to him, maybe there was something hidden there? "We should look," she said quietly. Liam nodded, but his eyes swept the park again before he spoke. "If we do it soon. They will not wait forever." And as the wind shifted off the river, Helen could not shake the feeling that someone was already listening. The next morning, the air carried the smell of wet pavement and rust as Helen unlocked the door to Robert's old workshop. It had been 5 years since anyone stepped inside. The hinges groaned in protest, and the scent of motor oil, dust, and metal drifted out to meet them. The space looked exactly as Robert had left it. Tools hanging neatly on the pegboard, jars of screws lining the shelves, workbenches worn smooth by years of use. Liam moved through the room slowly, his eyes scanning the shelves and the floor like he was reading a language only he understood. Helen stayed near the back wall, running her hand across the edge of the workbench. Her fingers brushed against something underneath a metal toolbox she did not recognize. She pulled it out and set it on the bench. The latch was stiff, but after a moment it snapped open. Inside was a manila envelope, the tape sealing it brittle. With age, Helen peeled it back and slid the contents onto the workbench. There were copies of property deeds, a stack of warehouse records, and at the very bottom, a black and white photograph. The image made Helen's breath catch. Robert stood beside a man she had never met in person, but whose name now felt far too familiar. Victor Hale. Behind them, looming like a shadow in the background, was the same warehouse marked on the map she had found in the attic. Liam stared at the photograph, his jaw tightening. "That is him. That is the man who was there when I was taken." Helen felt the weight of the photo in her hand. If Victor had been working with Robert at some point, then this was more than a stranger taking a child. "They were not alone in this," Liam said quietly. "Someone else close to us helped him." They left the workshop without speaking much more, each carrying their own questions. But when they reached Helen's front porch, they stopped cold. A small stone lay in the center of the welcome mat, holding down a piece of paper, 4 words, written in the same block letters as before. "Last warning," and Helen understood then that they were running out of time. The message came just after sunset, slipped under Helen's door, the same way the warnings had arrived. It was written in the same block letters, but this time there was no threat, only an instruction. "Midnight. Warehouse. Come alone if you want answers." The words stayed with her through the evening, circling in her mind. She did not call Liam. She did not tell anyone. By the time the clock neared midnight, she had made her decision. The streets were slick with rain as she parked several blocks away from the warehouse marked on the map. She walked the rest of the way, her footsteps sounding too loud against the quiet. The rusted metal door gave a long groan when she pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, carrying the faint echo of dripping water. Pale moonlight filtered through broken windows high above, casting long fractured shadows across the floor. A figure stepped out from between the stacks of crates. Helen's breath caught. It was Liam. He looked at her sharply. "You should not have come here. You sent for me," she said. His head shook. "I did not send that message." The sound of footsteps came from the darkness behind him. A man emerged slowly, his tall frame filling the space. Even in the dim light, Helen recognized him from the photograph in the workshop. Victor Helladot, so, you figured it out, he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. Helen's pulse quickened. Your husband and I built something together, Victor continued. Something valuable. But, he decided to keep it for himself. I needed leverage. Liam's voice was low, steady. That leverage was me. Victor did not deny it. It kept him quiet, but then he died. Now I think you have what he took from me. I do not know what you are talking about, Helen said. Victor's eyes narrowed. The Keychin. Liam stepped forward, pulling the small metal keychain from his pocket. Under the moonlight, its surface caught a glint. This is not just a keychain, he said. It is an actual key. He led them to the far corner of the warehouse, kneeling to run his hand across the wooden floorboards. One plank shifted under his touch. He pried it up, revealing a small metal hatch beneath. The key slid in perfectly, turning with a heavy click. When he lifted the hatch, the cold gleam of a steel lockbox reflected in the pale light. Victor stepped closer, his shadow falling over them. And now, we see what was worth all of this. The steel lockbox was heavier than it looked. The metal cold under Liam's hands as he lifted it from the hatch. Victor's gaze never left it, his expression a mix of triumph and impatience. He took a slow step forward. That box holds a ledger, he said. It came from a tunnel buried under this building, a tunnel used decades ago to move things without anyone knowing, cash, goods, information. Your father found it, and instead of giving it back to the others, he hid it here. Helen felt the air shift. What is in the ledger? Names, Victor replied, his tone almost sharp. Dates, transactions, connections that could destroy the wrong people if it ever saw the light. Your father was going to use it when the time was right, but that time never came. Liam held the box closer to his chest. And you have been chasing it ever since. Victor did not answer. He was about to speak again when the sound of an engine cut through the night air. Headlights swept across the high windows, blinding them for a moment. The growl of tires on wet concrete was followed by the slam of multiple car doors. 3 men entered through the side of the warehouse. Their movements were sharp, practiced. One carried a crowbar, another had a pistol, and the third moved with his hands free, but his eyes locked on the lockbox. Victor's voice was suddenly low and tense. You were supposed to bring the boy, not both of you. The man with the pistol smirked. Then plans have changed. The weapon came up, but Liam moved first. He swung the lockbox hard into the man's arm. The shot went wide, the sound exploding against the walls. Helen dropped low, her ears ringing. Victor lunged, grabbing the pistol, as it clattered to the floor. Go, he shouted, shoving the man back. Take it, and run. Liam did not hesitate. He grabbed Helen's arm, pulling her toward the rusted door. Their footsteps echoed between the stacks of crates, as shouts and scuffling filled the cavernous space. Behind them, they burst out into the night air, lungs burning, rain slicking their faces. Liam still clutched the lockbox, his grip unyielding. They did not stop until they reached the shadowed street where Helen had parked. Somewhere back inside that warehouse, the fight was still raging. But she knew the real battle had only just begun. The rain had followed them all the way across the city, the streets glistening under the dim glow of street lamps. Helen drove straight to the precinct, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. Liam sat beside her, the lockbox resting on his lap, as though letting it go would be unthinkable. They parked in the back lot, away from the main entrance. Helen led him through the rear door, where the smell of stale coffee and paper filled the narrow hallway. At the far end, in a cramped office lined with old case files, Detective Carla Reeves looked up from her desk. For a moment, her expression was surprise. Then it shifted into something harder to read. Helen sat down quickly, explaining in a low voice everything that had happened. The meeting at the diner, the warehouse, Victor, the lockbox. Carla listened, without interrupting, her eyes moving between Helen and Liam, as if measuring every word. Finally, Liam placed the lockbox on her desk. Carla fetched a small crowbar from the corner and pried it open. The lid gave way with a dull metallic creak, revealing a bundle wrapped in layers of oilcloth. She unwrapped it carefully, and a leather-bound ledger slid into view. Carla opened it. The handwriting was precise, the pages filled with neat columns of names, dates, and amounts. Helen leaned forward, scanning the entries. Then her eyes froze on one in particular. Reeves, see $12,000. She looked up sharply at the detective. Carla's jaw tightened. "It is not what you think," she said. But the weight in her voice carried no comfort. Before Helen could speak, the overhead lights flickered once, then again. A low hum filled the room before everything went dark. The faint glow from the street outside was cut off as the sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway. Carla moved quickly, drawing her sidearm from its holster. "Go," she told them, her voice firm. "Take the ledger and get out the back door." Liam hesitated. "What about you? If they get me, I have been ready for that for years," she replied. "Now go." Helen grabbed Liam's arm, and together they slipped out into the shadowed hallway. The sounds of the building filling with movement and voices that did not belong to the police. The last thing Helen heard before the back door swung shut was Carla's voice, sharp and unyielding, telling the intruders to stop where they were. The alley behind the precinct was slick with rain, its puddles reflecting the dull orange glow of a single streetlight. Helen and Liam hurried through the shadows, the leather-bound ledger wrapped tightly in Liam's jacket. The sound of raised voices still carried faintly from inside the building, but there was no sign of pursuit, at least not yet. They were almost to the corner when a figure stepped out from behind a dumpster, blocking their path. Victor Hale. His coat was damp, his hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes were sharp and fixed on the bundle in Liam's arms. "You are out of time," he said. "They will keep coming until they get that ledger. Give it to me and I can make sure you both disappear for good. Somewhere they will never find you." Helen's voice was cold. "The way you made Liam disappear before." Victor's expression did not change. "I kept him alive. Without me, he would not be standing here." Liam stepped forward, his grip tightening around the bundle. "And without you, I would not have lost 14 years of my life." The sound of sirens began to rise in the distance. Drawing closer, Victor glanced over his shoulder, then back to Liam. "Decide now," he said. Liam looked at him for a long moment, then slowly held out the wrapped bundle. Victor took it without checking inside, tucking it under his arm. Without another word, he slipped back into the darkness between buildings. Helen turned to Liam, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You gave it to him." Liam unzipped his jacket, revealing the real ledger inside. "I gave him my sketchbook. Let us hope he does not notice until it is too late." The wail of the sirens grew louder, the blue lights flickering against the wet pavement. Helen and Liam started moving again, the real ledger secure in his arms. But both knew that Victor would. 2 days later, the rain finally broke. The streets of Seattle glistened under a pale, watery light as Helen and Liam walked into a quiet government building with the ledger sealed inside an evidence bag. The federal investigators took it without ceremony, but Helen could see in their eyes that they understood exactly what they had been handed. The process moved quickly after that. Names from the ledger began appearing in headlines: business owners, politicians, and men who had once walked freely through City Hall, now facing charges. The investigators promised there would be more arrests in the weeks ahead. Victor Hale was nowhere to be found. One of the agents suggested he might have slipped across the border before the first arrest warrants were signed. Carla Reeves disappeared. As well, she had delivered the ledger to the authorities personally, then vanished without leaving a trace. Whether she had gone into hiding for her safety or for reasons of her own, neither Helen nor Liam could say. For the first time in years, Helen's home was quiet without feeling empty. She still locked the doors twice at night, still checked the street before stepping outside, but the constant weight pressing against her chest had eased. Liam began sketching again, filling the pages with drawings that were no longer only memories. They ate dinner together at the kitchen table, where an empty chair had stood for so long. And for a few hours each night, the house felt like a place they could call home again. But deep down, they both knew this was only the surface. There were still names on that ledger whose owners had not yet been touched, and those names had power. The kind of power that did not fade quietly. The mornings felt different now. The sharp bite of fear that had shadowed every sunrise was no longer there, replaced by something quieter, almost fragile. Liam stood in the front yard of the house he had left 14 years ago, his hands in the pockets of a new jacket, the old keychain clipped to his belt loop. The cedar tree swayed in the breeze, its branches bare but still holding the same shape it had when he was a boy. The ledger had done its work. Federal agents had confirmed that the most dangerous names on the list were either behind bars or facing trials that would strip them of everything they had built. The network that had stolen Liam's childhood was breaking apart. There were whispers that Victor had fled to another country, and that Carla was living under another name, far from Seattle. Neither had been seen again. Helen stepped out onto the porch, a mug of coffee in her hands. She looked tired, but it was a different kind of tired, not from carrying the weight of fear, but from finally setting it down. "They told me this morning that the last of the warrants have been issued," she said. "It is finally ending." Liam nodded, his gaze still on the cedar tree. It will never give back what was taken, but maybe it will stop them from taking it from someone else. They stood in silence for a while, listening to the faint hum of the city waking up. Later that afternoon, Liam walked alone to the park by the river. He leaned against the railing of the pedestrian bridge, watching the water slide beneath him. From his pocket, he pulled a single page from his sketchbook, a drawing of the cedar tree as it had looked in his memory, full of leaves, with a boy sitting in its branches holding a small key. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it back into his jacket. That evening, Helen found him in the kitchen, looking out at the cedar tree in the porch light. "Your father gave you that keychain so you would always know where home was," she said. "I think in the end, you brought it back to us." Liam's voice was soft. "Home is not just a place. It is the people who open the door when you knock." Helen smiled faintly. "You knocked," I answered. "That is all that matters." Outside, the wind stirred the branches, their creak sounding almost like a memory. For the first time since his return, the knot in Liam's chest loosened. The danger was gone. The answers were known. And in the quiet, they could finally breathe. If you are still watching this story, it means it deserves your like and subscribe. Please help me reach 5,000 likes, because this is the target from my mother. So help me, friends, it is totally free. Also, tell me from which city you are watching this story.